The day my son removed me from the guest list to my own grandchild's christening. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I simply drove to the bank and asked to speak with an attorney. My name is Miriam Oakes and I am 67 years old. I have spent most of my adult life working as a licensed practical nurse at a hospital in Greenville, South Carolina. I raised my son, Conrad, alone after his father, my husband Raymond, passed away from a heart attack when Conrad was just 19. Raymond was 52 years old. He died on a Thursday morning in February, sitting in his favorite chair in our living room, with a cup of coffee going cold on the table beside him. The paramedics told me it was fast. I have never been sure whether that was meant to comfort me. After Raymond died, I kept going because there was nothing else to do. Conrad needed me. The mortgage needed paying. The world did not slow down to allow grief a proper schedule. So I went back to work the following week, picked up extra shifts on weekends, and told myself that falling apart was a luxury I could not afford. Conrad was a good young man, thoughtful, earnest, the kind of person who called his mother when something funny happened at work, just because he wanted to share it. He had his father's eyes and his father's laugh, and sometimes, when he was not paying attention, I would catch myself staring at him and feeling two things at once. Gratitude that I still had him, and a sorrow so deep I could not put language around it. When Conrad was 26, he met a woman named Diane Ashford at a corporate networking event in Charlotte. He called me that same night, barely able to contain his excitement. He said she was brilliant and funny, and the most put-together person he had ever met. I remember smiling at the phone, thinking, this is what I worked for. This is why I took the overnight shifts and skipped the vacations and kept every dollar I could manage to set aside. I met Diane for the first time about 6 weeks later. She drove down from Charlotte with Conrad on a Saturday afternoon. She was, I had to admit, impressive in the way that certain people are impressive from a distance. Beautiful. Polished. She wore clothes that looked like they cost more than my monthly electric bill. And she carried herself with the kind of confidence that I imagine comes from never once having had to wonder whether there would be enough money at the end of the month. She brought a bottle of wine and complimented my house. She asked careful questions about Conrad's childhood. She laughed at the right moments and smiled at all the right things. I remember thinking, she is performing, but I could not explain why I felt that way, and so I decided I was being unfair. Sometimes loneliness can make you suspicious of happiness. I had been alone long enough that I wanted to give myself the benefit of the doubt. The wedding happened 2 years later. A garden ceremony outside Charlotte, elegant and expensive. Diane had excellent taste, and she made sure everyone knew it. The centerpieces were elaborate. The flowers were imported. The menu had been developed in consultation with a private chef. 230 guests attended. I sat in the second row on the groom's side, next to my closest friend, a woman named Ruth Callender, who had worked alongside me at the hospital for nearly 20 years. I wore the blue dress I had bought specifically for the occasion. When Conrad kissed his bride under an archway covered in white roses, I cried. Real tears. The kind that come from somewhere you cannot prepare for. I was happy. Genuinely, fully, completely happy. That much I want to be clear about. Whatever came later, that moment was real. What I did not know that evening, what I had no way of knowing, was that I had already done something that would eventually change all of our lives. I had already been to see an estate planning attorney. I had already made arrangements. I had already spent the better part of 15 years quietly setting the stage for a gift so significant that even I sometimes had to remind myself it was real. Let me explain how it started. When Raymond died, he left behind a life insurance policy. Not a large one. We had purchased it years earlier when we were young and thought we had more time to upgrade it. After the funeral expenses and a few outstanding debts, what remained was modest. Not enough to change my life, but enough to matter if I used it carefully. I invested it. Slowly, conservatively, with no expectation of dramatic returns. Then, over the years, I added to it. Every extra shift, every holiday I worked instead of requesting off, every vacation I declined to take. I clipped coupons until I knew the weekly sales at every grocery store in a 10-mile radius. I drove my car until it had 190,000 miles on it. I repaired things instead of replacing them. I want to be clear about why. It was not because I enjoyed deprivation. It was because I had a vision. My parents had never owned property. My grandparents had rented their whole lives. I grew up understanding that wealth in a family did not materialize out of nowhere. Someone had to begin it. I decided that someone would be me. By the time Conrad turned 30, the account I had been building for years had grown beyond what I ever told anyone. I had reinvested dividends. I had purchased a small parcel of land in the early years when the price was almost nothing, and the county had since developed around it so thoroughly that its value had multiplied several times over. I had been patient in the way that only people who have learned to wait truly understand how to be patient. When Conrad announced his engagement to Diane, I called my attorney. A careful, thorough man named Reginald Pace, who had handled my affairs for nearly a decade. And I told him I was ready. I wanted to transfer the land into Conrad's name as a wedding gift. I wanted the paperwork prepared quietly, signed privately, and presented on the day of the wedding in a simple envelope. No announcement beforehand, no financial conversations. Just the gift when the time came. Mr. Pace walked me through the transfer documentation over the course of several months. He was meticulous. He asked questions I had not thought to ask myself. He prepared multiple copies. He kept the originals in a fireproof safe in his office, and he handed me a sealed envelope to deliver on the wedding day, containing the deed and a notarized letter of transfer. The land's assessed value at the time of transfer was just over $380,000. Conrad could develop it, sell it, hold it, or build on it. The choice would be entirely his. I told only one person. Ruth. She knew because she had been beside me through all of it. She was the person who had shown up at my door the day after Raymond's funeral, with a casserole and a box of tissues, and had never once made me feel like I was too much to be around. She cried when I told her. I did too. The wedding evening came. After the ceremony and dinner, the gift opening began in a small area set up near the bar. Guests gathered around with their checks and their boxes wrapped in silver paper. Conrad and Diane sat at a table together, and a bridesmaid with a clipboard kept a record of each gift. When my turn came, I walked forward with the envelope. It was plain white, the kind you buy in a box of 50 at any office supply store. I had deliberated over that detail more than anyone would probably believe. I had considered buying something elaborate to wrap it in, something that signaled ceremony. But in the end, I decided the plainness was right. The gift did not need decoration. The gift was enough on its own. I handed it to Diane. She accepted it with a smile. Then she looked down at the envelope in her hands. The smile shifted, not dramatically, just enough. Her eyes moved to the envelope, then briefly to me, and I saw something in that look that I recognized because I had seen it before. In the smaller moments over the past 2 years, the moments I had tried to explain away. It was assessment, the rapid, instinctive calculation of someone deciding whether something was worth their attention. She turned the envelope over once. Then she laughed. It was a light, easy laugh, the kind that invites others to join in. She held the envelope up slightly and said, to no one in particular and everyone at once, "Well, I have a feeling this one is not from Neiman Marcus." Several people chuckled. Conrad smiled uncertainly. He did not know what was inside the envelope. Almost no one did. Diane set it down on the edge of the table without opening it. She was already reaching for the next gift, a large silver box with a white satin bow. "We'll circle back to this one," she said lightly. But she did not circle back to it. The gift opening continued. Box after box, envelope after envelope. The plain white one sat at the corner of the table, and no one picked it up again. At some point, I noticed it was no longer where she had set it. I scanned the table quietly. Then I looked at the discard pile, where the wrapping paper and ribbons had been collected. The envelope was there, not torn open, not examined, simply discarded along with the tissue paper and the ribbons, as if it were packaging rather than the thing itself. I stood still for a moment. Ruth appeared beside me. She had seen it happen. She did not say a word. She simply put her hand on my arm and held it there. I excused myself quietly. I found a restroom at the far end of the venue. And I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, not crying, just breathing. I looked at my reflection. The blue dress, the silver earrings Raymond had given me for our 20th anniversary, the face of a woman who had worked for 30 years to give her son something his father never had the chance to give him. Then I walked back out to the reception, went directly to the discard pile, and retrieved the envelope. No one noticed, or if they did, no one said anything. I found Conrad at the bar. He was talking to a friend and turned toward me with that open, easy smile of his. I took his hand and pressed the envelope into it without a word. He looked at me, confused. I smiled back, then I said very quietly, "Keep this somewhere safe, it belongs to you." He started to ask what it was. I shook my head. "Read it later," I told him. "Just keep it." Then I hugged him once, said my goodbyes to the guests I knew, and drove home. I did not hear from Conrad for 2 days. When he finally called, his voice had a quality I had not heard since he was very young, since the week after Raymond died, that suspended, fragile tone of someone who has just learned something that rearranged the world. "Mom," he said. "What is this?" I told him. "Everything. The account, the land, the years, the attorney, the paperwork in the envelope." I told him it was his, free and clear. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then he said, "Diane threw this away." "I know," I told him. "I picked it up." Another silence. Then, "She didn't know what was in it." "No," I said, "she didn't." He asked if I was angry. I told him the truth, which was that I did not know yet what I was. I told him I needed a few days to think. He said he understood. He sounded like he meant it. Over the next week, Ruth came by twice. We sat at my kitchen table and talked through the whole thing the way women who have been friends for decades can talk through things. Without performance, without pretense, just the plain facts and what they meant. "She made a judgment," Ruth said on the second visit. "About the envelope. About you." "Yes," I said. "The question is whether that surprises you." I thought about it honestly, and the honest answer was, not entirely. Because it was not the first judgment Diane had made about me. It was simply the most visible one. I thought back to the first time I had visited Conrad's apartment after the engagement. Diane had given me a tour with the kind of enthusiasm that was really about showing rather than sharing. The furniture was expensive, the finishes were curated. Everything had been selected to communicate something. At one point, she had commented on a photograph I had given Conrad for Christmas several years earlier, a framed print from a local artist. Nothing remarkable, just something I had thought he would like. Diane had said, with a small smile, "Oh, Conrad has had that forever. We keep meaning to update the gallery wall." The photograph was gone by my next visit. I thought about the holiday dinner the previous year, when Diane had spent most of the meal directing the conversation toward people she found impressive, and away from anything that touched my life, my work, my neighborhood, my history. Not rudely, she was never rude. She was precise. She knew how to guide a room without appearing to do so. I thought about the afternoon, about 8 months before the wedding, when she and I had been alone together for almost an hour, while Conrad finished a work call. She had been pleasant enough, but there was a moment, just one, when she looked at my hands, my actual hands, and then back at her own, and something passed across her face that I recognized as comparisons. None of these things were enough to confront. None of them constituted a single moment I could point to and say, "This is where the problem lives." They were the accumulation of a pattern, and patterns are the hardest things to describe to the people who do not want to see them. Conrad came to visit on a Saturday, 10 days after the wedding. He came alone. He sat at the same kitchen table where I had sat with Ruth, and he put his hands around a cup of coffee and did not speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "She thought it was a card." I nodded. "She didn't mean to." He stopped himself. He rubbed his forehead. He started over. "She didn't know, but I keep thinking about how she made that comment to everyone, before she even opened it." I waited. "She judged it before she even knew what was in it," he said. "Yes." He looked up at me. "And she judged you." I did not argue with him. I also did not agree out loud, because Conrad was a grown man arriving at his own conclusions, and that was important work that needed to happen without me steering it. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "About what?" I said. "The land." I had already thought this through. I had thought of little else. The land stays with me for now, I told him. Mr. Pace has the paperwork. The transfer hasn't been executed. And until I understand things more clearly, I'm not in a rush. Conrad nodded slowly. He did not ask me to reconsider. I think part of him had expected me to and was relieved when I did not. What I did not tell him yet was the second thing I had decided, the one that felt larger to me than the land itself. I had decided to stop being invisible in my own family. For 2 years, I had accepted the small dismissals. The tours that implied my taste was outdated. The conversation steered away from my life, the photograph replaced on the gallery wall. The way Diane spoke to her own mother, full of warmth and admiration, and then spoke to me, full of courtesy and distance. I had accepted it because I told myself I was being gracious. I told myself I was protecting Conrad. I told myself there was no proof, only feeling. But a woman who throws away a gift before opening it because the envelope does not meet her standards has shown you something. Not through a pattern of small moments you can question or doubt. Through one clear, public, unambiguous act. I knew what I had seen. Over the following months, something changed in Conrad. It did not happen suddenly. It happened the way important changes usually happen, slowly, over many conversations, in the quiet moments between saying things out loud. He called more often. He visited more frequently. He asked questions about Raymond that he had never asked before. About what his father had been like when they were young. About what our early years together had cost us and what they had given us. He seemed to be assembling something. A fuller picture of where he came from. And why that mattered. He also, I could tell, was watching Diane more carefully. He did not say so directly. But there were things he mentioned in passing. A comment she had made about one of his colleagues. A decision she had pushed for without much discussion. A dinner with her parents where Conrad said he had felt, for the first time, that he was a character in someone else's story, rather than a person at a shared table. I used to think she was just particular, he told me on a phone call in October. Now I think she needs everyone and everything around her to perform a certain way, including me. I did not add to this. I let him sit with it. In November, something happened that neither of us anticipated. Diane became pregnant. The news arrived as a surprise to both of them, and whatever had been quietly fracturing between them was temporarily suspended in the practical urgency of preparing for a child. Conrad sounded cautiously happy when he told me. Diane sent a text message with a photograph of the ultrasound, which I printed and put on my refrigerator. I allowed myself to hope. Perhaps parenthood would shift something. Perhaps the arrival of a child would rearrange Diane's priorities in a way that nothing else had managed to do. For a few months, it seemed possible. Diane was, by Conrad's account, taking the pregnancy seriously, eating carefully, attending every appointment, nesting with an intensity that was characteristic of everything she did. She sent me photographs of the nursery. She asked, once, for my mother's apple cake recipe, which surprised me enough that I sat down after reading the message. And then came the christening. I learned about the date from Ruth, not from Conrad. Ruth had seen an announcement in a private social media group that included mutual acquaintances. When I called Conrad, he answered on the second ring, and I could hear immediately that he had been expecting the call. "Mom," he said. "When is the christening?" I asked. A pause. "Next Sunday." "And when were you going to tell me?" Another pause. Longer. "Diane wanted to keep it small," he said finally. "Just her family and close friends." "Am I not your close family?" I asked. My voice was calm. I had learned, over many years of difficult conversations, that calm is more powerful than its alternatives. Conrad did not answer right away. When he did, his voice carried something I recognized as shame. "She said she wanted it intimate. I didn't push back the way I should have." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." The silence between us lasted almost a full minute. Then Conrad said, "I'm sorry, Mom." "I know you are," I told him. And I meant it. Conrad was not a cruel man. He was a man who had learned to smooth things over, who had learned that Diane's preferences functioned like weather, easier to accommodate than to challenge. That was its own kind of problem, but it was a different one. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The ultrasound photograph was still on the door, held up with a magnet from a national park I had visited with Raymond 25 years earlier. I thought about the land, about the envelope, about the gallery wall, about every meal at which I had been spoken to, but not actually included, about the christening I had just been quietly removed from, to keep things intimate. Then I called Reginald Pace. "Reginald," I said when he picked up. "I need to review the land transfer paperwork again." "Of course," he said. "Are you thinking about proceeding with the transfer?" "No," I said. "I'm thinking about what else I can do with it." There was a brief pause. Then he said, "All right, when would you like to come in?" I came in the following Thursday. We talked for 2 hours. By the time I left, I had a new plan. Not a plan for revenge, I want to be clear about that. A plan for clarity. A plan for what happened next. The christening took place without me. Conrad attended. Ruth told me later that he had looked uncomfortable throughout. Diane's family had filled the church and the restaurant afterward. And by all accounts, it had been a lovely event, well organized, beautifully photographed, and shared extensively online. The baby, a boy they named Archer, was held by Diane's mother in the photographs. Conrad stood to the side in most of them, looking like a man attending someone else's celebration. 3 days after the christening, Conrad came to my house. He did not call ahead. I heard a knock at the door and found him standing on the front step, still in his work clothes, looking like he had come directly from the office. He had his father's eyes. I had always known that, but in that moment it was particularly striking, the specific quality of Raymond's eyes when he was carrying something he did not know how to set down. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Always," I said. We sat at the kitchen table. He declined coffee. He was quiet for a while, looking at his hands, and I waited because I knew he needed to arrive wherever he was going on his own schedule. Finally, he said, "I owe you more than an apology. Tell me what you're thinking," I said. He looked up. "I've been telling myself that I was keeping the peace, that I was being the one who didn't make things harder." He stopped. "But keeping the peace by letting someone disrespect my own mother isn't keeping peace. It's just choosing a side and pretending I'm not." I let that sit. "She doesn't see you," he said. "She never has. And I've watched it happen for 2 years, and I kept explaining it away, and I don't know how to forgive myself for that." I reached across the table and put my hand over his. "You're here now," I said. "That's not enough." "It's a beginning," I said. We talked for 3 hours that afternoon, not about the land, not about the christening specifically, but about the longer pattern. About every moment Conrad had witnessed and rationalized. About the ways people can love someone and still fail them. About the difference between a mistake and a choice. About what it means to be seen. Near the end of the conversation, Conrad asked me directly, "What did you decide to do with the land?" I told him. I was not transferring it to him and Diane jointly. I had revised the plan entirely. The land would be put into a trust, structured so that the income it generated would be available for Archer's education and major life expenses when he reached adulthood. Conrad could serve as trustee, but the asset would be protected, clearly designated, and outside the reach of decisions that Conrad alone could not control. It was still a gift to the family. It was still the product of 30 years of discipline and sacrifice. But it was a gift with structure, a gift that said, "I love you, and I am not careless with love." Conrad was quiet for a long moment after I explained it. "She's not going to take that well," he said finally. "I know," I said. He nodded. "I think I'm okay with that." That evening, after Conrad left, I walked out to my back porch and stood in the October air. The sun was going down behind the line of trees at the back of the property. The sky was the color it gets in South Carolina in autumn, a deep orange, fading into purple at the edges, the kind of sky Raymond used to stop whatever he was doing to stand and look at. I thought about everything that had happened since the wedding, the envelope, the discard pile, the christening, Conrad's face at my kitchen table. I thought about Archer, who had not yet done anything except arrive, and who deserved a grandmother. I was not finished being that grandmother. That was not a decision Diane Ashford could make for me. What happened over the following year happened slowly. The best things usually do. Conrad had several difficult conversations with Diane, the kind I was not present for, and did not need to be. I know some of what passed between them because Conrad told me, carefully, without burdening me with more than I needed to carry. I know that Diane was angry about the trust arrangement, then defensive, then, in what Conrad described as a very long and very hard December, something closer to honest. I met with Diane once, in January. It was her request. She came to my house on a Tuesday afternoon, and this time she did not bring wine or compliments. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, in a plain sweater, without the particular self-possession that had always characterized her. And she looked like someone who had been through something that had stripped a layer away. She did not try to explain the envelope. She did not minimize the christening. She said, "I treated you like you were less than. I knew what I was doing, and I told myself it didn't matter, and I was wrong." I said, "Yes, you were." She looked at me steadily. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "I don't know yet if I will," I told her saucily. "Forgiveness is a process, not a decision. What I'm willing to do is stay present, for Archer. And for Conrad. What happens after that will depend on what you do next, not what you say today." She nodded. I could see she had expected something more dramatic, more conclusive, either a confrontation or a resolution. I gave her neither. I gave her the truth, which was that trust is not rebuilt in a single afternoon. She came back the following month, and the month after that. Slowly, cautiously, the way you re-enter a room after something in it has broken. I am not going to tell you that everything is now healed. That would not be true, and it would not be fair to say. What I will tell you is that, at Archer's first birthday party, I sat at the table with Conrad on one side of me and Ruth on the other, and I held my grandson while he attempted to eat his birthday cake, and I was not in the back of the room. I was not outside looking in. I was exactly where a grandmother belongs. Afterward, as the guests were leaving, Diane came and stood near me for a moment. Archer was asleep against my shoulder. She looked at us and said quietly, "Thank you for not giving up on him." She meant Archer. I know she meant Archer. But I think she also meant Conrad. And perhaps, just barely, she meant the family that had almost come apart at a reception table over a plain white envelope that turned out to contain everything. I drove home that evening thinking about Raymond. Thinking about what he would have made of all of it. I think he would have said what he always said, which was that people show you who they are when things are easy, but they show you who they want to become when things get hard. I still have the land. The trust is established. The paperwork is signed. Reginald Pace has all the documents filed appropriately, and every month, when I drive past the property and see what it has become, what it will eventually mean for a small boy, who does not yet know his grandmother spent 30 years building it for him, I feel something I do not have a precise word for. Not pride exactly. Not peace exactly. Something between the two. Something that belongs specifically to women who have learned that the deepest investments are the ones that outlast you. Raymond would have called it faith. I think he would have been right.